Hello everybody and welcome to the All About Film for Ezox ReraChrome 100. This video, as I just gave away, discusses Ezox ReraChrome 100 Reversal, also called slide film, looks at how to use it, the film's characteristics, no, it doesn't look at technical details, that's a mistake in my template, and sample images. ReraChrome is a medium speed film rated at 100 ISO, and it's available in 127 format only. Alright, this All About Film video is going to be truncated compared to normal videos in this series, and this stems largely from the dearth of information provided by Ezox about this film. Also, if I'm honest, there was also the sheer joy I had at developing the last roll of this and knowing I would never touch it again. In fact, most of this video is going to be dedicated to problems I had with this film. And I feel badly about that because I hope that the problem rolls that I had are all in the past, also in Ezox's past, and not representative of what this film will do in the future. So to that end, the best tip that I have for you with this film is do not buy it used or past code. It was not predictable or reliable when I used it, and I don't think that's going to improve as this film's old stock ages. For grain, this is one of the areas where I liked this film a lot. The images have a grain that seemed to dance in the background, carrying the image's tones and colors into a realm of texture and viscera. The grain made this film look cinematic, and when the film worked, I loved the images from it. I just kind of wished that it happened on more than a handful of the rolls that I bought. For tonality and tonal range, even by slide film standards, it's pretty limited. Now that is heavily dependent on your digitization technique, as we'll talk about later in this section. This film drops shadows like people drop first dates, where the other person opens up by talking about politics and all the babies they want in the future. This film can retain highlights, but only if you meter your shot off of a lighter part of the scene that you're looking at. Like slide films writ large, ReraChrome likes even light. For acutance, all slide films transition softly, and that's part of their beauty. ReraChrome is no exception, and I did like the color transitions in this film a lot. For contrast, it is high, and again, that's per norm for slide films. I do like the contrast profile and the look that it gives images, and I really strongly preferred in some ways the contrast that this film gave with DSLR digitization. The next section will dive into that in depth. For sharpness, slide films are not sharp, and ReraChrome is also not a sharp film. It will perform up to the standards of your lenses, but it's not one of these ultra sharp films where you can, do some grain level peeping, and that's not what slide films are supposed to be. And I also think that the general softness is the wrong word, but the look in terms of the way that this film handles images benefits the images a lot. For your gamma, slide films always have good gamma because they have to in order to create projectable images, so this film's got a pretty steep gamma line. That technical data is not published, but you can just kind of look at the film and know that's a steep gamma line. For digital conversion, ReraChrome converts to digital generally okay, and the next section will hop into this film and compare lab scans to my digitizations with my DSLR. That section will show that in some cases, and in some ways, the lab scanner performed better, and in other ways and in other situations, the DSLR performed better. But first, as an additional note, Ezox has not, that I found, published a datasheet for ReraChrome. So most of the technical details, like reciprocity failure, spectral sensitivity, dye density, and development latitude are unavailable, so we're just going to skip all those sections. Every ReraChrome roll that I shot came back with a dark yellow tint on the base. Well, some of them had a light yellow tint or a reddish tint, but they all had a strongly colored base tint. Sometimes I could correct that in post, and sometimes I simply could not because the base tint really wiped out the color trueness. The exact tint varied by intensity and hue in each roll. This made the exact image performance for each of the rolls that I used unpredictable at best. 4 of the rolls I had my lab scan, and those were the last 4 rolls that I shot before I scanned them with my DSLR. There are elements of each result that I like more than the other. For instance, in my lab scans, I like the color performance more and the shadow retention, and that's based on the way that the Norita, that old school photo lab, uses its presets to correct that sort of thing during scanning. But I also felt that those images looked a little bit lifeless. For my DSLR scans, I liked the hue and saturation of the colors that turned out well more. But I feel that the contrast is too strong in many cases, though not always. And the color cast is also too strong in many cases, again, not always. With my DSLR scans, I did dial back the contrast in raw editing a lot more than usual in order to try to control that contrast. So that should give you an idea of just how strong the contrast was in this film. Also, the DSLR scans have a strong green cast to them, and that owes to the film's yellow base tint and the bluish light that I used for digitizing film larger than 35mm. That said, I did also use color temperature correction in raw editing to try to eliminate that. It ended up not working perfectly, to say the least. This was a film that I had a lot of trouble with. Ultimately, I preferred the lab scan shots in even light and in shots where there was no sky. For images with sky, the lab scan coloration was unpalatable, and with those same images, I could correct a lot through the DSLR capture and raw editor and recover color trueness, kind of, in the skies. Ultimately, it was a mixed bag on which method worked better for digitizing this film. Had I been able to correct the color cast reliably and consistently in the slides in RAW more easily, I would have been all in for DSLR digitization on this film because I do think that overall the colors look a lot better where they turned out well. However, instead, I would suggest that for most people, lab scanning will be much more pleasing with this film. Oh boy. So I selected 13 photos of many that had problems. These show the most common problem I had with ReraChrome. This was the film's base color. Every roll had some kind of hyper warm base colorization. I don't think that's an inherently bad thing, but this is too much. While I forget the exact number of rolls that I bought, it was more than 24, somewhere between 24 and 30. 8 of them were unusable due to the image problems that stemmed from issues with this film. Here's what happened with 6 of my rolls. This texture. You can see this on most of the photos in this section. This photo shows how the colored texture pattern affected different areas of tone and dye density differently. It was not repairable in post at all. Here's one from a different roll, and you can see that the texture's color was different. It was also masked by midtones to an extent. That was something that played out over and over again in these rolls, the way that this blotchy pattern was affected by highlights, shadows, and midtones. This is from yet another roll. This problem was pervasive. It happened on 4 of the rolls that I bought. Same roll as the previous shot, I believe. Interestingly, I think the pattern had different colors on different rolls. This was one of the least egregious examples of this issue. 2 of the rolls came back with this hard color line at places in them. I think I lost about 6 photos this way. This represented a frame where the color cast of the die just changed on a hard and straight line. I don't know why that is. Maybe there was an issue with the die application or something like that, but it did really mess up some of the photos. Here's what part of the end of a roll looked like. The first image like this that we saw earlier in this section came from the front of a roll. This one came from the back. Just to confirm, none of the rolls with this issue got wet. I noticed that on rolls with this pattern, a lot of color trueness and tonal range were lost. So I suspect again that this issue was to do with one or more of the die layers, but I can't explain it. Yeah, I paid for this film and for the developing. I'd like to tell you here at the end that Ezox had a great response for this, that they apologized and immediately replaced the 4 faulty rolls. I sure would like to tell you that, but that's not what happened. Ezox ultimately, after multiple exchanges, replaced 4 rolls of faulty film. You might have caught earlier that I said I had 6 rolls that had this texture issue. Take one more guess than you need where the other 2 of those rolls came from. And that image with the hard die line, that was also in the replacement roll batch. So of the 4 replacement rolls, 1 was good. Ultimately, ReraChrome's performance left me very displeased, which is about as mad as I get. Will ReraChrome's performance prevent me from buying more Ezox film? Not at all. I've used their black and white films in the past, and I've liked the results a great deal. I also really like that Ezox is producing a specialty format film. Making or distributing film is a hard business. Doing it in a specialty format makes it even harder, and for that, Ezox deserves a lot of credit. I did have some other problems with ReraChrome, however. 8 of the later rolls purchased for this video came on all plastic spools instead of the earlier rolls' plastic spools, which had a brass winding nub molded into them. The all plastic spools broke on 3 of those 8 rolls during winding, and that was in different cameras. What happened was those little plastic forks that attached to the winding mechanism either just sheared off or shattered. That left me with 2 partial rolls of film and one that was completely ruined because I didn't know the nub had sheared off and opened the camera after I thought I had wound through the entire roll. So my problems with ReraChrome spanned a long time, all of the 3 years or so that I took capturing photos for this video. So while I am happy to withhold judgment on Ezox's black and white films for now, I cannot in good conscience suggest that ReraChrome is a film to buy, and if you've heard enough of these videos, you'll know that's an incredibly rare thing for me to say. 127 is a niche film stock and expensive. The product and its performance need to match the price. On a last note, of the 8 final rolls that I bought, photos from 3 of those were shown in the lab scan comparison section. So this video spent a lot of time discussing problems I had with this film. However, I hope that those problems were limited to a single batch and that the problem rolls are out of the system and that future rolls will be much better with deep tones, a cinematic look, and the dancing grain that I adore in ReraChrome, because the best photos I took with this came from the last 8 rolls of film. So I am hopeful that in the future ReraChrome will be a very good and nice film to use.